Hey, this is MJ, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make our children's version of the Cascade Mountain Cardigan. The yarn that I will be using for this pattern is Premier ColorFusion DK weight yarn. The color that I'm going to be using in this tutorial is saltwater taffy, and you will need 2 hook sizes for this pattern. I'll be using a 4 and a 4.5 millimeter crochet hook, and these are Cancer Streamline hooks from Furls Crochet. The construction of this cardigan is it begins at our sleeve cuff and we work from the side across, so we get these nice vertical stripes along the cardigan. So we're going to make 2 identical pieces starting from the sleeve, working across. And then we're going to make some granny squares, and they are going to go along the back of the cardigan. And then we're going to have a nice ribbed band that's going to be worked around. You can add some buttons if you want. Now, if you want your sleeves to follow somewhat of the same color pattern, just make sure that you start each sleeve with the same section of color. This one has a little tiny bit of this white blue, and then you can see it goes into sort of the pink to the brownish pinky taupe color to the blue, etc. So I'm going to make sure that I start my next sleeve the same as how I've worked that one. So I'm going to begin with the 4 millimeter crochet hook. Put a slip knot on your hook, and I'm going to chain out 9. Then we'll work in the second chain from the hook a single crochet and single crochet into each chain across. So you should end up with a total of 8 stitches. We'll chain 1 and turn. And now we're going to work only through the back loops of the stitch. So going through the back loop only, we'll work a single crochet and single crochet through the back loops across. And count your stitches as you go so that you are sure that you're sticking with 8 stitches as you work these rows. Chain 1 and turn. Now make sure to follow along with your pattern for the size that you're working on. You will have different stitch counts and row counts for the different sizes, but this will follow through the steps so that you can successfully make any of the sizes. So we're just going to repeat row 2, working as many rows as you need for the size that you're working on. Chain 1 and turn. I'll be working up a total of 24 rows. So I'm going to continue working them, and I'll meet you up when I have that complete. Okay, so once you have your 24 rows, it's easy to count them by just counting the ridges. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. I've already chained 1, and now we're going to work across the length of the band in single crochet. So we want 1 single crochet per row. So 1 row here, you're going to see it's going to be a little bit thicker to work through, and then a row that just has a little loop. And you're going to work across, so 24 stitches in total. Okay, so I've worked across 24. Now I'm going to change over to my larger hook. And I'm going to chain 3. Now our chain 3 is going to count as our first double crochet. So we're not going to work another into that stitch here. This chain counts for this stitch. We're going to go into the next stitch and we're going to work double crochets across. And including that starting chain, you should again have 24 stitches. Okay, so we've worked across 24. We're going to chain 3. And I'm going to skip over the first 3 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, and in between the stitches, we're going to work a cluster, which is 3 double crochet. So 1, 2, 3, and chain 1. Going to skip the next 3, 1, 2, 3, and in between the stitches, we're going to add another cluster. 1, 2, 3, and chain 1. And we're going to repeat this all the way across. So cluster, chain 1. So now we're coming to the end. You should have 3 remaining, and we're going to do a double crochet between the second and last double crochet. Okay, or the turning chain. Now we're going to chain 3, turn, and we're going to do a cluster in the first space. So our chain 3 counts as a double. So we'll work 2 doubles to finish the cluster, chain 1, and then we'll work a cluster, chain 1 in each chain 1 space across. So 3 double crochet, chain 1, cluster, chain 1. So I'm going to work that across. Okay, and in our last space, we'll work 3 double crochet. So I'd already chained 1, and then we're adding the 3 double crochet. So the next row is going to be an increase. So let's just take a look at how many clusters we have at this point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I want to increase up to a total of 10 clusters. But just so that you're aware, one of the rows will have 1 less because it starts and ends with a double. So let's chain 3. And our first cluster to increase is going to go between this first double and the second double. So we'll work 2. Okay, so that makes our first cluster. We'll chain 1, work a cluster, chain 1. In each chain 1 space across. And our last cluster we're going to put between that second and third double crochet. 3 doubles. So now if you count your clusters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we're going to chain 3 and turn. So that counts as a double and a chain 1. And now we'll work cluster, chain 1 in each chain 1 space across. So this row will have 8 clusters and 2 double crochet. So cluster, chain 1 in each chain 1 space. And I'll end with a double between that second and third double crochet. So this is just a repeat of row 2, and we're going to repeat row 2, row 3, and row 4. So we've done a repeat of row 2, now we'll repeat row 3. So we'll chain 3, and in our first space we'll work our 2 double crochet to make a cluster, chain 1, and cluster, chain 1 in each chain one space across. Okay, so I ended with a cluster in the last space, and now I'm going to chain 3, and we're repeating row 4, which is that increase where we're going to put the cluster between that first and second double crochet. So work 2 doubles. So our first cluster is made, chain 1, and then we'll work cluster, chain 1. Okay, so we're going to end with that cluster between the second and third double. And now we are going to alternate between row 2 and 3 because I'm up to 10 clusters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So just follow along with the pattern that you're working on, the size you're working on, and however many increases you need to do to get up to the number of clusters that you need. So I'm going to chain 3, turn, and just repeat these rows now that we've already worked through, row 2 and 3, until you have a total of 16 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the 8th, so you want a total of 16. Okay, so once you have the 16 rows done, we need to add some extra length to each side for the body section, and then we just work that back and forth in rows. So I'm going to turn back to my right side. So at the top left hand corner here, we're going to join a chain on. So when we work back, we can just continue right across. I like to use the chain, the color that I should roughly be to when I come working back across, so that it blends. So I'm going to chain out 36. Now you can change the length of the cardigan by chaining out a multiple of 4. Once you chain out 36, you can fasten that off. And on this side, coming back to the working yarn, you're going to chain out 1 extra for the turning chain. So we need to chain out 37 on this side. And now in the second chain from the hook, we're going to work a double crochet, double crochet in the next 2 chains as well, and then chain 1, skip the next chain, a double crochet in the next 3, and chain 1, skip the next chain. We're going to repeat this all the way along the chain. Okay, so then once you get all the way across, you should have 1 chain remaining. Make sure to chain 1 and work your next cluster in the next space. So cluster, chain 1. Okay, so right here, and then you'll continue across, cluster, chain 1 in each chain 1 space across. So you'll be ending with a cluster here, chain 1. We're now skipping the first chain and working a double crochet in the next 3 chains. So 1, 2, 3, chain 1, skip the next chain, and we're repeating this all the way across. So double crochet in the next 3, chain 1, skip the next chain. Working this all the way across, you'll be ending with those 3 double crochet. Okay, so I finished off with the 3 doubles. Now we're going to chain 3, turn, and we're going to work back across. Now in all the chain 1 spaces are cluster chain 1. So let's just give it a count just so we're on track with our cluster count at this point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So I have a total of 28. So now this row will be 27 with the 2 double crochet, starting and ending with a double. So cluster chain 1, cluster chain 1 across in those chain 1 spaces. So I'm just adding my double crochet between the second and third DC. I'm going to chain 3 and turn. And we'll work our first cluster in our first space. Chain 1 and cluster chain 1 across. So we're just going to do a total now of 10 rows, repeating row 2 and 3 across. And when you get to the end, you'll just be adding that cluster in that last space. Okay, so I'm going to complete working 10 rows and then we'll meet up again for the next step. Okay, so I have both sides completed. I've worked the 10 rows and we're ending with that double crochet. So I'm just going to fasten this off at this point. So now the cardigan is going to be put together like this, and we're going to have the granny squares running only up the back. Okay, so the granny squares are going to go the back like this. And I need to make one more with you, so we're going to work that up together. But I just love how this color combination is coming together for the cardigan. It's going to look so cute. And then we're going to finish it with a nice ribbed band. So we're going to do some ribbing along the bottom to give it some more length, and then add ribbing around the collar. So it's just going to look like our adult cardigan, but in our miniature form. For the granny squares, we're going to be using the smaller hook. So at the 4mm, we want to make them a little bit smaller. So let's give them a measure just so you can see the sizing. So they're about 3.5 inches. Okay, so you want to make sure that you drop down to a small enough hook to get them to be a little bit smaller than our stitches that we're working on the cardigan. Nice and tight. So I'm going to continue from the ball I was working from. But you can kind of pick what colors. So this one will go more to the blues. So I'm going to continue. I just started working from the ball. I had this color, which it then went into this color to the blue, and then this next square will be even more blue. But you can play around with your colors to get how you want your squares to look. So we'll make a magic ring, wrap the yarn around your index finger 3 times, take your smaller hook, pushing it through all 3 loops on your finger. Can always help that along if you need to. You're going to take that first loop, pull it through, and chain 3. Our chain 3 is going to count as our first double crochet. We're going to be making our clusters, and you want 4 clusters separated by chain 1s. So the beginning cluster will have 2 doubles. So our chain 3 counts as 1. Then we'll chain 1, and I'll work 3 more clusters separated by chain 1s. Chain 1, and now we need to pull our ring tight. So just push your work out of the way so you can see your loops. Take your tail. I'm going to start pulling and see how only this loop is pulling in. This one's popping up. Take the loop that is pulled. If you give it a tug, it's going to pull that other loop nice and tight, and then just take your tail and pull. So now our circle is closed. Now we can slip stitch. I just like to go into the first double just because I find the chain, it sometimes leaves a little bit more of a gap than I like to see. So I just like to go into the top of the stitch or just go into the top of the chain. Maybe we'll do that. Go into the top of the chain. Okay. Just so that it doesn't pull those apart. And then we can slip stitch across to our first chain 1 space. Okay, so I like to work this in a continuous round because I like to keep my corner, my yarn at the corner. So I'm going to keep working around. I'm not going to turn for this. So we'll chain 3, work 2 doubles for our first cluster. So let's just refer to that as the beginning cluster. I'm going to chain 1 and work another cluster. So each chain 1 space now is going to have cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1, and these are going to make our corners. So chain 1, let's go through this one more time together. We're going to do cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1. Oops. And I'm going to do that in the next 2 chain 1 spaces around, and we're going to form our square. Okay, so I've chained 1. We can slip stitch across, so we can go in the very top of that first chain. Slip stitch through the double, to that first chain 1 space. So we get over here to the corner, and this is where I always want to start, is in the corner. So now we're going to chain 3, do our beginning cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1. So every corner will be worked the same. So we'll do cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1 in every corner. And then every chain 1 space between the corners will get a cluster, chain 1. Really simple, basic granny square. So as we increase, you just have more chain 1 spaces between your corners. So just more clusters are added between the corners as you work. So for this granny square, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 rounds. So we're going to end up that we have 2 clusters between the corners. so chain 1 and cluster chain 1. So I'm going to continue working this around now. Okay, so I slip stitched across. I'm just starting my next round. So this will be our final round. You're going to do cluster, beginning cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1 for your corner, chain 1, and then we're going to have cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1, and then we're going to work another corner. So cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that all the way around. Okay, so once you get all the way around, we're going to slip stitch across. Let's go in the top of that first chain 3 and then the double, chain 1 space. Okay, and then we need a long tail, like at least 4 times the length of the side. You want it nice and long. We don't want to run out because we're going to use the tails for seaming. So just make sure you leave a nice long tail. Okay, so for this size, you're going to need 3 granny squares. So I'm just going to get this tail out of the way. Just need to weave it back in the opposite direction. So you can put them together however you want. Then what we're going to do is we're going to need to slip stitch the granny squares together. So I'm going to come to the corner here, corner chain 1 spaces. I'm going to use this tail, pull through, I'm going to chain 1. Okay, so we're now going to slip stitch this together, but what we want is the first loop you see here, the front loop, and then the back loop. So we're going to go through this loop, then we're going to go through the back of this loop and slip stitch. Okay, so we're going to do that all the way across. So the front loop, and then the back loop. And I'll show you once I get across. Now when you get to the chain 1 space, just go through the entire space. When you sandwich these together, those are the loops that are going to easily be able to do it. So it's almost like you don't necessarily have to really think about it. Those are the loops that are going to be at the top exposed. So I'm going to do that all the way across, and I'm going to show you how I've gotten all the way across to this chain 1 space. I'm going to chain 1 to secure that. And this is going to be how it looks. So those loops that we didn't work into should kind of just be showing nice and neatly on this side. Okay, so then you can just pull that through. So I left lots of tail for that. And now we can weave these ones in. We don't actually need this one tail because we can use the tail on this one to join them, so that the right side's facing again, and you can pull through with the slip stitch, chain 1, just using that tail, and then we're going to do the same thing Just getting it going is sometimes always the trickiest part. But once you get going, just make sure you're getting the 3 stitches for each cluster and then the chain 1 space. Okay, I'm gonna work that across. Okay, so we'll get the panel together like this. I'm gonna weave in my tails to get those out of the way, and then I'll show you the next. So make sure to weave in all your tails, and at this point, you can determine the front or the back. They are identical, so it doesn't really make a difference. You can maybe just decide by looking at them, looking at the color patterns, if there's one you prefer over the other. I'm also going to make whatever row you end on the right side because I wanna work through the stitch that's finished like this. So if you look at this side, you can see it's not going to look as nice for joining. So you want this as your right side. So what we're going to do now is take our granny square panel. So we'll do this as the back, and you can even flip it depending on what way you want the color pattern going there. And what we're going to do is seam to the sides of the cardigan. So we're going to seam it this side, and then we need to seam it this side. Again, right sides facing. We're going to do this just like we seamed the granny squares together, but instead now we're working across the side of the cardigan. So I'm going to take my smaller hook. I'll get a slip knot on my hook, and we need to come down to the corner. So I'm going through that last stitch, and then I'm going through here, and now I'm going to line up my clusters. So we're going to go through the front loop, across to the back loop, and make sure you do each stitch of the cluster. And then also the chain 1 spaces. So now how I'm going to handle the corners of the granny square here, I'm going to go through this space. I'm going to go through the chain 1. I'm going to slip stitch it. And then I'm just going to go back through and also slip stitch over in this corner of the next granny square, and then continue working across. Then we're just back into the clusters, which are easy. So you're just going through that chain 1 space twice to kind of link it in to the chain, to those corners of each of those granny squares on that side. So I'm going to continue this across. Okay, I'm finishing up. So I'm going to do my slip stitch and then chain 1 so that it is secure. And fasten that off. So you'll need to weave in that starting and ending tail. This is what it's looking like. And then we need to do the same thing over here. So we just need to join them up. We're going to do right sides facing. And continue exactly doing it how I worked the other side. So slip knot on your smaller hook. You're going to go through the corner, through this corner here to get that in, and then chain 1. And then we jump right into going through the clusters. So we're going to go through the front over to the back loop of this cluster. and I'm going to continue this all the way across. Okay, so what we want to do next is you could block it out to measurements just to get it all flattened out and nice and smooth. And once you have that step complete, we can seam our sides. So the way I'm going to do this is using the mattress stitch, and that is just going to eliminate seeing any of the yarn that you're using. Because the color changes as we go, the mattress stitch is just going to hide the yarn color. Now, if you have done this all in a solid color, you're welcome to seam it using just a whip stitch. And if you are going to do that, I would say put your right sides facing. So take the cardigan, put the right sides facing, and just whip stitch it together. Now, if we're going to do the mattress stitch, it's a little bit trickier, but it's still fairly simple to do. But what we want is the right sides facing. So I like to just get it in place like this. Then I know these are my right sides. So you're having your right sides side by side, so to speak. So you want to get it all lined up. We're going to be seaming it, matching up our clusters as we go. Take your yarn needle, get a nice long tail so that you can work all the way. I like to start just by getting my yarn knotted to the bottom to start with. Then what I'm going to do is take my yarn needle and I'm going to hide the yarn up through the side of this cluster. Then I'm going to come to this cluster on this side, hiding my yarn up the side. Work through that chain one. So I'm going through a big section just to make it go a little bit quicker. The idea is you want to make sure that you're hiding the yarn going up the sides, okay? And then when you pull, it's going to pull it all together, and it's going to hide the yarn, so you're not going to see it as you work. So you're going to do this all the way. When you get to the sleeve, it's going to look a little bit different. You're just going to want to hide through the sides of the rows as well. And just work that all the way, get both sleeves seamed up. Once you get that step completed, I'll meet you back up. We're going to work a band across the bottom, and then we're going to work the collar. Okay, so once you get all the way down, you can just weave in this tail, and you can see it blends it in really nice, even at the bottom, the cuff. Okay, so once you have the cardigan all seamed together, we're going to work on the band now. So you do have some options with the band as to how you want to do it. If you want it to pull in, we want to do less stitches across. If you want it to stay about the width of the cardigan, then we're going to do more stitches. So we'll do 2 stitches per row to keep it somewhat even. And if you want to pull it in at the waist a little bit, you could do 1 single crochet in one row and then 2 in the next, 1 and then 2, etc. across. So for this cardigan, I'm going to have that it cinches in a little bit at the waist. So I'm going to go 2 single crochet, 1, 2 in that first space. And when I get to the cluster rows, I'm just going to add 1. So I'll do 2 in the next row and then only 1 in this row. So I'm going to work that across. And now when you reach the granny square, we're going to work single crochets in each of the double crochets, and then we'll skip the chain one. So we'll do 3 and then we'll skip 3, skip the chain one space, then I'll do 2 in this row, 1 in this row, 2 in this row, 1 in this row. And we'll work this all the way across. So now at this point, I am going to do a join as you go ribbed band. You could of course alter this. You could do any type of band that you would like. You could just work single crochets if you prefer. You could work single crochets in the back loop only to give it a little bit of a ridge look, but I'm going to go with the band to match the cuffs. So I'm going to chain out 9. And a single crochet in the second chain from the hook and each chain across. So I'll have 8 stitches, the same as the cuff. But follow along with the pattern for the size you're working on. And that's 8. I like to count just to make sure I stay on track. I'm going to skip the first stitch and then slip stitch into the next 2. And this is going to join it. So now that first stitch we skipped, this row counts for it. And then now we'll work 2 more rows for the slip stitches we just made. So for every stitch across the bottom, you'll have rows made. And they'll all be slip stitched to the bottom. So we skip over the 2 slip stitches, working single crochets now through the back loops. Chain 1 and turn, and single crochet through the back loop only back down the row. Slip stitch into the next 2. And you're just going to keep repeating this. We're going to work that all the way across. So once you get all the way across, we can fasten off. So now put a slip knot on your smaller hook. We're going to come over now to the right front. Join in. We're going to work chain 1, work a single crochet in every stitch across the band. So that's 8 stitches. Okay, so 8, then we'll do 1 here for the base row, and then we're going to work single crochet in the chain 1 space there, and a single crochet per stitch and a single crochet in the chain 1, and continue that all the way around. So we're just doing 1 stitch per stitch. When you get to the granny square, you're going to be doing the same thing, just 1 in each stitch and chain 1 space. Work this all the way around. Okay, so once you've worked all the way over, I'm gonna fasten off. And the reason is I don't like always the way it looks when you're slip stitching to the wrong side of the work. And you are gonna notice it in a way that you're not going to want to, how it's gonna blend with this yarn. So I suggest fastening off here and joining back. It gives us some more tails to weave, but better to do that than have it end up not looking as finished. So what you're going to do is next you're going to want to mark off your buttonholes if you want to add buttons to the cardigan. So I've marked off for 4 buttons, but you can space them out however you want. Add as many buttons. You can do larger spaces between them if you want, so that you're not using as many. These buttons are 25mm size. And what we're going to do is put your stitch markers. So I've marked the 4th stitch up. I've counted 12, marked the 13th, counted 12, marked the 13th, etc. up the side. But you can space those out however you want. As long as you mark it ahead of time, it makes it really easy when working this. So what we're going to do is join back onto the bottom. It is nice to continue if you can, but just how this yarn is going to look, it's not going to blend well. You're going to notice the slip stitch. So put a slip knot on the hook. We're going to join down into the 1st stitch with a slip stitch. And chain out 9. You're then going to work a single crochet in the 2nd chain from the hook and work single crochets across the chain. So we're going to have 8 stitches, which is going to match up with the cuffs and also with the bottom band. So this is going to be worked the same way as I've shown you already to work the bottom band. We're just now doing it for the collar. The only difference will be the rows for the buttonholes. So I'm going to slip stitch in the next 2. So when you've slip stitched 2, you need to work 2 more rows to account for those stitches. So our first row accounts for that 1st stitch that we skipped. Now we've slip stitched across, and we're going to work 2 rows for those slip stitches. So we're going to skip them, 1, 2, and then work single crochets through the back loop. So I'm going to work those and then meet you back up for that buttonhole row. So now our next row is marked. So always pay attention whether it's the 1st or the 2nd row. So if it's the 1st marked stitch, you'll be making your buttonhole as you work back up. If it's the 2nd stitch, you'll be working it as you come back down the row. So we're going to slip stitch into the next 2. Going to turn, and I'm going to skip those slip stitches, and then I'm going to work 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to chain 2, skip 2, but now we may find the chain 2, skip 2 is a little bit too big of a buttonhole, so I'm going to see. So I'm going to finish this, and I'm going to test it out, and this is the way you can see if the button and it's going to go through there nicely. If you wanted to tighten it up a bit, one thing you could do is chain 1 only instead of chaining 2. Still skip the 2 stitches, but then come over and do your single crocheting in the back loop of the next 3. You just don't want the yarn to loosen up over time and the buttonhole be too big. So let me just see how this is with just the chain 1. Okay, it's tight, but my button does go through it. So I'm just gonna leave it like this because this way it might just help it tighten it up just a little bit so that the buttonholes don't get too loose. You can always test your button. This is 25 mil, but you could use a 30 mil button if you wanted, and that would probably work perfectly with the chain 2. Just alter this hole based on the size of your button. Now, if you just do 1, it will be slightly off-centered, but just make that work. Really do what you need to do to get the button that you're using to fit with your hole. So now we're going to chain 1 and turn. We're going to come back down. So 1, 2, 3. Now I am going to add 2 single crochets still into the hole so that our 8 stitch count remains the same. And then we'll work down the remaining 3 stitches, single crochet in the back loop. And then we can slip stitch into the next 2. So this is how you're going to make the buttonholes every time you come to a marker. We can double check this again now just to make sure. If it's too tight, go back and add. Okay, and it's good. So I'm going to leave it like that and continue working, and I'll work my buttonhole rows as I come to them. And I'm going to continue just working all the way around the cardigan. When you finish the entire ribbed band all the way, all you're going to do is then sew on your buttons on the band opposite the buttonholes, and your cardigan will be all finished. But I'm going to go ahead and complete it. I'll meet you back up when I have it finished. So I completed the cardigan. I ended up just adding 3 buttons, but you can add as many as you want. Make sure to check the description box below the video for the links to the pattern and the supplies. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and tap the bell to stay updated on all my new videos and tutorials. Thanks so much, guys. Have an awesome day.